Sorry, taking a minute. My old eyes can't see as well as they used to. The bifocals don't work quite as well as they used to. Good morning. It's good to be with you. Well, this morning I thought we'd talk about some of Macy's work again and diving into her work on living systems to build on how we think about our relationship to the planet and all manner of other things. And also tie that back to our practice a little bit. So curious to see what shows up. But when I first was introduced to what she calls living systems theory, it felt like something very old that was being presented with fresh and new language. And what she was essentially teaching was that scientists are starting to describe in this time what the Buddha taught some time ago, that life is a process, pattern, relationships, and not separate things that feel familiar to us. So it was kind of interesting to read, like anthropologist Gregory Bateson saying that he called systems theory the biggest bite out of the tree of knowledge in the last 2,000 years. And I was like, go back 500 years further, buddy. You might have missed out. But anyone who's sat still and kind of watched your sensations and watched your experience knows what it's like to feel things moving and to feel some of these things that you thought were so fixed and static become less so. So I think about this as a shift from a kind of mechanized view of the world, of things being objects or machines, into living wholes. So Western thought has been largely dominated by instrumentalist thinking. Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Bacon, others kind of trained us to think like mechanics or operate like we're in a world, we are subjects in a world of objects. And you kind of think of in that view, there's an operator inside of the machine, like who holds and controls things and makes things go. But when we watch life as it actually is, cells, planets, otherwise, that model breaks down pretty quick. Or if you ever actually happen to have a conversation with a 6-year-old, that real view breaks down very quickly as you try to explain what things are. So as I was trying to think about a metaphor to start us off as we dive into this work, I thought of a wind chime. In particular because I find most wind chimes terribly annoying, but I like the wind chime that we have outside. And so a wind chime makes music only as air moves through it. Stop the breeze and the sound is gone. So maybe we're more like wind chimes. Our song only exists through breath, food, sunlight, and relationships as they move through us. So I'll start us off with that as we dive into some of those work. Some of the core principles that Macy thinks about in terms of living system is the idea of wholeness, and that the wholes are often more than the sum of their parts. So it's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 1 + 1 = some quantity that's hard to even understand. Yes. Something new emerges, right? And it's not merely the sum of its ingredients, but it's the qualities that arise from these myriad relationships, these myriad points of connections. So the easy one to think of, hydrogen, oxygen, or gases. Yet wetness, as we know it, only appears when they engage in a particular relationship inside of particular conditions. A school is like this in my world. A school is kind of has its own emergent properties that are very different than the individual kids, teachers, and folks who occupy a schoolhouse. Likewise with a family or anything else that you can think of that we're naturally meshed into, these living systems. But seeing only the pieces invites a kind of fragmentation. And that's our Western orientation, as we tend to analyze and see things in bits and pieces. And then we miss the wholes. And when we start to see wholes, it allows for wiser action. And Macy is constantly calling us back into the larger field of wholes. She has a wonderful description of holons, which is a wonderful piece in her mutual causality work, which I won't go into right now because It makes your head explode, but it's wonderful. And the idea of just what are the holes that we're actually looking at. I don't know if it was in Okamura or somebody else was thinking about the relationship between a finger and a hand, right? So you could think of a finger as a whole unto itself. And then if you zoom in a little bit or zoom out a little bit, you realize, oh, but that finger is part of a hand. And so you can describe the hand as the sum of its fingers. Is that really an accurate description of what it is, or is it something more? And then you can do that infinitely, narrowing in deeper or zooming out further. And if you do that for long enough with your own body, again, your head will start to explode in beautiful ways. So another piece that's really important inside of this living systems view is the concept of flux, that life maintains itself and maintains stability by moving rather than freezing. Things aren't as fixed as we pretend they are. Even the wood in the floor is made up of electrons and things that are whirling, quite literally, right? So our bodies regulate temperature and blood sugar, unless you eat too many P. Terry's shakes at the end of a day and find yourself half in a coma on the couch, as I did with my kid the other day. A forest breathes carbon and oxygen. You can think about droughts or floods that keep an ecosystem in check. So there's always this flux, this sense of things that are constantly in motion. And it's this kind of dynamic equilibrium that invites human systems to stay responsive, adjusting practices and structures as needed to respond so that the whole stays alive and moving. The other piece that I'll spend a little bit more time on as we dive in is the self-organization, and that could be, I don't know, an entire intensive on itself. So I'll give you just a flyby of some things. So given energy and information, life generates complexity without central command. That's a weird idea for us. We tend to think of things that come from the sort of center out, and that's not exactly how it happens. You could think of neurons that form new pathways when we learn, or an immune system that learns to fight off new pathogens. You could think about, what were we talking about, fungi earlier? So thinking about fungi networks and how they move throughout a forest. Social movements, certainly root social movements, and even some of the movements that I've been lucky enough to participate in my education work, where there's an organicity to them, the emergent properties that come out of this. So Macy sees all of these as a kind of source of hope that naturally moves towards creativity when the conditions are right, when we curate those conditions for ourselves. There's also a piece that we talk a lot about here about emergence, about all the surprising possibilities that emerge as different causes and conditions meet, so that the interplay of these parts, out of these interplay, qualities emerge that we never could have predicted and no blueprint could map, which is hopeful. Because when you're looking at things and it feels like the present design is so messy and so prone to harm, there's always the possibility that new qualities of relating can emerge. So we can think of consciousness that surfaces from cells, like how the heck does that even happen? We can think about culture and love that arise from individuals engaging in conversation or sitting across from one another in cushions and answering questions and happen to sort of fall in love with one another, even if you've never talked before. So emergence is a kind of the poetry of systems, is how you can think about it. New forms, new insights, new relationships that appear as connections deepen. And so this is some of the promise of the great turning that Macy is writing about. And I wanted to introduce you to 6 sort of facets of that in this. I'm going to pass these around. And Serenity, I emailed you a version of this that we can share with folks, if that's okay. Let's go Kim too. And I'm going to invite some other folks' voices into the room a little bit. What I did here is I just pulled some quotes from either from Macy herself or from folks that Macy really likes and respects that she's referencing and coming back to life. And so we'll walk through these kind of 6 facets that might be interesting to you. And my hope is maybe one of these just lands in an interesting place and crawls inside your brain and stays there for a while and does some interesting things when you're not thinking about it. Thanks. Serenity, are you able to find that? Did I get that to you okay? If you could share it, that's okay. If not, you can still hear, and I'll make sure I send it out a little bit later. So the first facet of this is a little bit more depth in how life self-organizes. And I'd love for someone to read this quote by Macy. Jessica, do you mind reading that one?
Sure. These scientists discovered that these holes, be they cells...
I'm sorry, a little louder, we can't hear. Thank you.
Yeah. These scientists discovered that these holes, be they cells, bodies, ecosystems, even the planet itself, are not just an assemblage of parts. Rather, they are dynamically organized and intricately balanced systems. This interplay is synergistic, generating emergent properties and new possibilities, which are not predictable from the character of the separate parts. For example, wetness could not be predicted from the combination of oxygen and hydrogen before it occurred.
So that's what I was stealing that one from that quote. So one of the things you might pull is that we talked about things are relational by nature, these emergent qualities that come forward. There's also a sense of kind of flow and feedback, that life persists because energy, matter, information continuously move through the system. It's dynamic all the time, like a body adjusting temperature or forest adjusting carbon. And there's an inherent creativity to this kind of self-organization that's possible. And I think if you've ever been a part of something that's self-organizing, you can live and experience that vitality and creativity that comes forward. We'll move through all of these and I'll invite some questions or responses in a minute, but Clayton, you're up next. Let's go water, fire, and web.
Water, fire, and web. We are not stuff that abides. We are patterns that perpetuate themselves. We are whirlpools in a river of ever-flowing water. Norbert Weiner.
Mm-hmm. And so what Macy talks about with this metaphor of water, fire, and web, there's only kind of one reference here. Water, you can think of, life holds its shape like a whirlpool. It's a stable form, but it's created by continuous motion and movement. So that's one metaphor for how this works. Fire, a flame stays alive by transforming what passes through it. Living systems likewise maintain themselves through constant transformation. So it's that process. Take away the fuel from the fire's gone, right? Whatever that source of fuel is. And then the web is the one that probably is most familiar to us. Everything exists within a network of relationships where each strand depends on and influences others. So whether that's identity, you can think of identity as a pattern and a flow rather than a fixed thing. And likewise, the systems themselves only endure as long as those movements and exchanges continue. One of my favorite quotes around this particular idea comes from physicist Carlo Rovelli, talking about humans and saying, we are nodes in a network of exchanges made up of the same atoms and light signals as pine trees and stars. Cool image, right? Gaia theory, you get that quote. Susan.
For the first time in our history, we can actually see our whole planet and recognize it as a living being. And we can understand that we are not its privileged rulers, but only one part, and not even an indispensable part, of its body. Elizabeth Sartorius?
I've only read it too, so it sounds good to me. Yeah, that feeling of our, that myth of our indispensability and dominion over the earth kind of gets questioned from this view, doesn't it? So instead, we think of the earth behaving like a single self-organizing organism, that its aliveness is there, the atmosphere, oceans, all living beings interacting in a particular way. And there's the possibility then of operating with life to create life-friendly conditions. And humans are then participants in this body rather than its masters. Deep ecology. Yes.
I am protecting the rainforest develops to I am part of the rainforest protecting myself. I am that part of the rainforest recently emerged into thinking. What a relief then, the thousands of years of imagined separation are over, and we begin to recall our true nature. The change is a spiritual one, sometimes referred to as deep ecology. John Seed.
Mm-hmm. And so Macy was part of this deep ecology movement and practice. And the view here is that all life has intrinsic value, not just its utility, its usefulness to the humans who occupy space on the planet. So it debunks that kind of instrumentalist view that we commonly have. And I think about this, I can't remember where I've read this, but there are movements and someone described movements in spiritual maturity as through prepositions. And the first one is, life happens to me. I am victimized by life. The sort of next phase is life happens by me. That's the instrumental place. I start to do things. Then life happens through me. You start to have a sense of energy and connection that's moving through. And then finally, as me. And when I think of this sort of deep ecology view, that's as me. It's a sense of I am not so separate as I can fool myself into believing from the spaces and world that I occupy. So then protecting nature is actually protecting our own extended self. It's not care for another exactly. It's a little different. And so then your sense of activism and action flows from a sense of care and belonging rather than obligation. Next one.
Beyond anthropocentrism, how'd I do? When humans investigate and see through the layers of anthropocentric self-cherishing, a most profound change in consciousness begins to take place. As the fog of amnesia disperses, there is a transformation in your relationship to other species. John Seed.
Yeah, so this idea of human-centeredness, of being the way that we commonly make decisions and move through the world, this view of living systems questions that, calls that, so it challenges those beliefs. I think I mentioned in a previous Dharma talk as I was doing my dissertation work, I chanced upon the work of new materialist thinkers who are talking about how matter has value in a way that we commonly dismiss. And it was interesting. There was some resonance with our practice in that space too. But it softens the boundaries between us that we're constantly protecting and the rest of life to hold that view. And it encourages some humility and reciprocity with the world instead of acting upon it. Next step.
The ecological self. With sufficient all-sided maturity, we not only move on from ego to a social self and a metaphysical self, but as an ecological self as well. Through widening circles of identification, we vastly extend the boundaries of our self-interest and enhance our joy and meaning in life. Anne Mace.
Mm-hmm. So then if you start to see yourself in this as an ecological self, then the boundaries become more porous. Right? So that your identity can expand into the larger web of life. And what this means is then joy and meaning can grow outside of the individual. You can think of that your participation in this broader ecology is an opportunity for joy and for care. So these are just a few of the, sometimes Macy yourself and sometimes some of the thinkers. And before I connect this to Zen practice, I'm curious, what of these ideas resonates with you, or lines or metaphors is kind of starting to rattle around for you?
I like the fog of amnesia dispersing. The freedom that comes when the anthropocentric self-cherishing lifts and you can see things as they are, and the release involved in that.
Yeah, I always think of when I think of that line of amnesia and then tying that to mindfulness. It's like, oh, it's remembering, right? And the sati is to remember. Ah, Stephanie.
Yeah, for me, it was the last one. That really resonated with my practice because in the morning after I say my chants, I say metta. And part of my metta is for all beings, living and non-sentient and non, because that really makes me think about how much I appreciate the rocks and the trees and the just the flora and fauna outside my door.
Thank you. Yeah. Pass the conch.
It made me think of lots of things, but one that came to mind is this book on the secret life of trees, where trees are talking to each other all the time. I love that. I love that image.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more than an image, it's a reality, but it's an example of this.
Yeah. And maybe some I've read Overstory from a couple of, whew, such a great book and has some of those themes fictionalized, but in beautiful ways too. Elizabeth.
I think the thing that struck me the most is it kind of walloped me like, oh, well, this is the Native Americans or the First People stories. It's just the intellectual version where, our culture kind of version. But I felt like you can easily interlay or overlap the two, and it's kind of the same story.
Yes, and in fact, Macy has immense respect for indigenous wisdom and knowledge and references that throughout her work. So, the systems language that she's offering is helping our poor Western souls make sense of things that everybody else has known for a really long time in some ways. But yes, there's a real resonance there. So I want to connect this to our practice just a little bit, and then we'll give you a little more time for questions too. So I think about this as kind of the same truth in different language that the Buddha taught. So the Buddha taught impermanence, no self. So anicca, anatta. And living systems theory echoes these. There's no separate enduring selves. There's only patterns that are sustained by causes and conditions. And there's all sorts of images of interbeing and interdependence that are present here and in our practice. So we're not the little bricks, we're not bricks in little fortresses, we're whirlpools in a river. We're more like flames flickering in air. And so from that view, saying I am independent is like saying a musical note exists apart from the symphony. Doesn't make any sense. It starts to feel weird when you think about it that way. And then obviously there's practice as direct seeing, the kind of art of noticing the natural flux and that is happening around us all the time. So that way that we direct our attention on the cushion and otherwise is similar to what Macy is calling us to do. So as we're sitting, it shows us plainly thoughts arise and fall away, sensations move, that motion of the body of being a process becomes more real and alive to us. So the practice doesn't annihilate the self, it reveals that the self wasn't never as fixed as we pretended it was, as we were imagining it was at the beginning. I also kind of think about this as a different kind of knowing than the conventional everyday knowing. It's the don't know mind isn't ignorance, it's freedom from the tyranny of certainty and control that we often exercise. So knowledge then is more provisional. It's born of context and what we know in relation to other things. You keep seeing me do this because I don't know how else to show that things are moving in this way, but that's what just shows up in my body. So system theory confirms that uncertainty hardens relationships soften. So certainty hardens, relationships soften. And Zen invites that kind of responsive way, that softened, responsive way, rather than a clinging to a fixed particular way that things must be or should be, or that we think they actually are. And so as I was thinking about this in terms of the Ziju Zamai, there are particular lines in here that tie really nicely. I won't do the whole the whole thing, but I wanted to get a few pieces in here that might be interesting to you. So the line always that gets me: grass, trees, walls, and tiles engage in Buddha activity. So Dogen insists that the natural world itself is active Dharma. Just like Macy affirms that matter and energy carry information and participate in life's self-organizing. In practice, you can sense the river practicing through you, not just around you. Also, we think about practice and realization are not two. So each moment of Zazen is complete awakening, not a step towards a later goal. Living systems, likewise, have no final product. There's no particular thing that the process is the result. It is the expression of those causes and conditions. And so sitting upright expresses Buddha Dharma in the way that a whirlpool expresses the river. And the one I think that gives me a little hope, particularly as I know that we're going to be talking about feeling the pain of the world this evening, is even one person's Zazen turns the great Dharma wheel. So Dogen says the merit of a single sit cannot be measured even by all Buddhas, and in systems language, a small action within an interdependent network creates immeasurable ripple effects. So one sit nourishes the whole field, and even small actions can have incredible impact. So I think for the moment that we're in and for the world we occupy, why is all of this important? Well, it kind of questions the particular American ideal of rugged individualism that we tend to cherish and happen to see in commercials a lot lately, but spiritually bankrupt and scientifically false. It's not true. Life depends on feedback, interdependence, and flow. And when we block feedback, whether in ecosystems or relationships, when we put up an impediment, we invite collapse. So when I think of despair, then, despair itself is feedback. Burning forests, unraveling climate violence. This is the system alerting us to imbalance. It's a call, an ask for a response. So to Peg's point, the apathy, like shutting down and avoiding that, is to ignore the call, is to ignore the alert. And so to allow ourselves to fall into despair is to kind of cut off the wires of feedback, to cut off those mechanisms. But to allow it to feel the pain fully, to feel that feedback, is to join in life's self-correcting work, to actually participate in that thing that we are naturally a part instead of pretending we are separate. So for Macy, our pain for the world is not pathology. It is the voice of the world speaking through us. And I think that's particularly important. I wanted to name that before we get to tonight, because some of the things that will surface may be a little hard, but the frame of that is that we're attuning and attending, not just kind of indulging in reckless despair, So then sitting, our practice is not to escape the world, to go to some special place or some special state outside of the world and mess, but to attune to it fully and completely. So if you can feel your breath as you feel the forest breath, feel your body as you feel the earth's body underneath you, then even despair belongs to the whole. So we let loose of our dreams of self-improvement and instead let that self drop away and participate in the living system as it always was without our stories about it. And just to give you one more metaphor, because my wife was trying to make sourdough and it didn't go well, so this was on my mind. So she goes, you can think of a sourdough starter. Flour and water alone would rot, but wild yeast enlivens it into a bubbling, self-feeding process. So, and somebody else was working on sourdough that I was in conversation with. Like that's been going around. But so the yeast isn't separate. This is not a separate being. It's a relationship, a living system. So to produce those sourdough things, that's what's needed. So are we, fed by all of these myriad causes and conditions, and remove us from the jar. You remove one of us from the jar and it dies, leave us in connection and we thrive. So I think 2 questions I would leave you with to consider throughout the day, or consider one of these quotes. If you're a moving, changing system, not a fixed self, how does that shift the way you meet the world? If you really are and you take that seriously, what does that mean for how you meet the world? And the second is, what if your grief isn't failure, but the world trying to heal through you? So can you respond to your grief as a call, as an alert? And tonight we'll dive into some of that. So got a little time. I'm curious what questions or things are bubbling up for you as you think about it.
Well, my head is just spinning because I have so many things that it's hard to.
I'm sorry, could you move the camera to the people?
Oh.
Thank you.
I was just saying my head is spinning with so many thoughts stimulated by this. So I want to focus on 2. One is that sometimes the actions we might take in the in sort of recognition or in honor of this awareness, that we don't know what the results of them will be. So I think about that just in the sense of any kindness that you offer to a stranger, you don't know what that's gonna mean. So that was on a very individual level. And the place where I'm really struggling, and this comes from my background in environmentalism and environmental policy and stuff, is that there is so much that needs to be done in the way of sort of repairing and restoring the influence that we've had in this kind of mechanism, for centuries, in this mechanistic, proprietary relationship to the world, and those things are not individual action. I mean, like individual actions are not enough. And so when I think about the world, just from my perspective of environmental policy, like thinking about flooding and stuff like that, it does bring me back to very, I don't want to say mechanistic, but it's a certain kind of, it doesn't feel sort of organic and self-organizing. So it feels like, there's actions we need to take. So I'm just struggling with that a little bit. So just my reactions.
So the question is, what are the catalytic elements in the system, right? What are the things that were the 1 + 1 = apple? And can we start to find or enact a few of those things that have ripples that are far bigger than we can imagine?
I just wanted to add on. So did you say individual actions aren't enough?
Yeah. They're not.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're going to heal or respond effectively to what's going on.
Yeah. And I think I similarly struggle because I loved what Peg said last night. We can't maybe fix it, but we can ask, what can I contribute? And that's what I feel capable of. But then I know that my one contribution is just teeny, so it's something I struggle with too.
It's interesting to think about how when I'm listening to that, and I fall into the same trap, right? Feeling like, I'm going to recycle this thing, right? Like do my little part, pay extra for these special recycling things that I can do as well. But I notice that inside of that, it's because I'm already wanting an outcome immediately, right? That outcome-oriented thinking is always there, as opposed to thinking about what's the sort of next right move and what is the next right relationship or connection I might make or find, or what else might want to emerge inside of it.
May I have to?
The doodad.
Yeah. What I think you just said was really salient. And I think that points to emergent systems don't have a fixed end point. It's a constant evolving process that we're a part of. And I think that causes suffering when we think, why can't we just get there? Why can't we just stop this thing or start this thing? That's never ending.
Yeah. What do we imagine there would be, right? Is that everything just, it's like we have a snapshot in our minds, but a snapshot is fixed where everything is perfect, but that's not actually what would happen anyway. You just still continue living, breathing, moving, processes whirling. We're just saying, we think those processes would enable more shared thriving. That's actually what we're trying to catalyze. Not a destination. Do that.
I think this is so important, and this is why environmentalists burn out, right? And they burn out because they have an attachment to an outcome and because they don't understand how it works. So we actually cured the hole in the ozone. Why? Because there was broad public consciousness that this was something we needed to do, right? And so I think there's, Macy's got this great model of 3 spheres of activity, and you can engage in any one of those spheres, and there's a little bit of overlap between them as well. But one is holding actions that stop the damage, right? And they might be legislative, they might be someone holding onto a tree, but that alone is not enough, and that's where you burn out, because you lose a lot of battles, right? In those holding actions. So that needs to be supported by something, which is the second sphere, which is the provision of structural alternatives. So if you don't want people to burn fossil fuels, you have to give them another energy source, right? So you provide this structural alternative of electric vehicles, right? And that alone is not enough, because why? Well, they're more expensive, I'm not really sure. So what you need in support of that is a change in consciousness. So that change in consciousness is what actually shifted things for the ozone layer, right? It wasn't any activism, it was that broad shift in public consciousness.
But it's all those things together.
It's all those things together. They all have to work together. So change of consciousness is pointless if there's no alternative for people, right? And so I always think this is a great way to think about it, because in my youth, I was very involved in the holding actions. I was furious, I was protesting it, and I saw the limits of what I personally could do in that arena. And so I ended up shifting into provision of structural alternatives. What I was providing alternatives to were standardized testing in school, which I thought was doing a lot of damage to kids' minds. So I could see, oh yeah, that's, but that's another place where providing structural alternatives, it's hard to get people to accept them. Well, this takes more work, looking at kids this way takes more work. So then I realized that, I was going to have to move into this change in consciousness. And I really feel like this is about that change in consciousness, about opening people's minds and hearts so that they, A, can see what's really going on, and B, see what they themselves can contribute, what the possibilities are for them. And it may be just caring for your aging parents. That may be what you can contribute, right? So it was helpful for me to see, oh, okay, so it's not like you're limited to one. You can do holding actions for one thing and then, work over here on provisions of structural alternatives and then keep working on changing people's consciousness. But that's, to me, seems like a virtuous cycle, right? It's kind of a virtuous cycle. And that, to me, is the cure for burnout, is it when you realize, oh, my work is actually in this structural alternative sphere, or my work is actually in changes of consciousness.
And I think to riff off of that a little bit, we're all positioned to make offerings in different spaces, right? So I can offer structural alternatives and have for the last 20 years in education because that's where I've lived and breathed, right? So I know I can do that, and I can do the consciousness changing work in that space. And so that's where I'm going to apply myself in my professional energies, right? Where each of us have gifts and access to have an outsized effect potentially in different spheres.
I really appreciate your last point about grief and our response. I think you said despair, and then I maybe translated it as grief.
It's both.
Yeah. So if I think about this in terms of polarity, if we have consciousness and the love, then love's response is often grief or anger or joy or anything. And these two work together in union. I had a really beautiful experience of this yesterday because I was driving and then my heart just suddenly was just like, oh, I was actually listening to music and I was thinking about this woman's beautiful voice. And then I was like, I think I might die right now if I don't hear my daughter's beautiful voice. I felt so glad that I could call her because she's leaving to Southeast Asia tomorrow and I won't be on the same time zone as her. And so I called her and she was in a period of anxiety and like deep tension and her own kind of swirl. And I had this moment where I thought to myself, it was my heart's longing. So what I said to her was, let's sing together. And we sang the song, This Joy That I Have, the World Doesn't Give It to Me. She suggested it, she liked it. And it brought her a moment of peace and brought her out of the swirl that she was in. And it brought me utter joy to connect with her in that way. And then I started to think, because I have a lot of people who have died in my family, most by now. And sometimes I miss them so bad. And I think, what if they just need me to connect with them in a certain way and sing them a song or send them love? I've heard this, Martin Purcell talks about like when you're grieving, to let your tears and your wailing actually send them on, to let yourself wail and grieve if you're feeling it as a offering and a connection. So that was a moment of that, actualizing the Dharma, in that moment, the longing, the grief in my heart to be with her is what she needed to, not coherent, but I offer that.
Beautiful.
What you said is so moving about y'all singing together. It's touches exactly on what Nate said about we are a relationship all the time, and I can't think of a more beautiful relationship than y'all's voices melding together.
I think we need to end.
We need to end?
Yes.
I think Stephanie had one last thing to offer, right?
Well, so I'll make it quick. When I heard Susan speak, my heart just went out because I thought that that's so different from the way I feel most of the time, that inability, that, this is, things need to get done, it's all going to hell in a handbasket, that kind of thing. But for me, I strongly believe that I have a lot I can offer. And that's hard for me to say because as I look at all of you, teachers, poets, inventors, I'm a grandmother. That's my claim to fame. But by God, it is mine. And I will say that is where I feel that I can shine in my little world. I can teach my grandchildren how important it is to recognize that the world around them is not separate from who you are. You know, that the rocks and the trees and the mountains have just as much right to be there and to be cherished. And when Jessica was talking about that sense of grief, I recognize that how often I feel that when I'm saying meta for living and non beings and sentient and non, that those beings don't have a voice that they can talk about. And so my saying meta feels like I'm giving a voice to them in my life. And that in that I can kind of hopefully seep through to those around me. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.